It is the 11 Dubcast. I'm Johnny. He's George. And join us for all your Bitcoin and cryptocurrency information here on
And
the premier
GameStop
source.
News up. GameStop stock news.
That's
updates.
right. GameStop stock. If you need all the financial advice, we have got it here on the 11 Dubcast. Occasionally we do talk about Ohio State sports, but woo-wee. If you listened to the 11 Dubcast last week and were like, these guys really have it on the ball when it comes to cryptocurrency.
And you were one of the over 6,500 people
that's right.
that tuned in.
That's right. If you're one of those people,
Ohio State commencement.
And if you're one of those people who tuned in this week expecting more of the same, we're sorry to disappoint you. We're going to talk about running backs. But if you do want to write in with random questions about cryptocurrency, I will be happy to accept them and then immediately deposit them in the trash because I have no knowledge of it whatsoever.
Somebody already asked this offseason on Ask Us Anything what our opinions on cryptocurrency were.
They did, and I said I think I used the word Ponzi scheme. I think that was the phrase that
I was nicer about it. So if you're really, if that's really got your britches riled up, go peruse our prior episodes
right
in audio format, and you'll find the answers you're looking for, and then you can stew about how dumb we are on the subject.
Sorry, I'm not a diamond hands hodl whatever. Actually, I'm just saying all that to get you guys out of the market so then I can corner it for myself and increase my portfolio. So that's really what it's all about. So I'm playing the long con. But we do occasionally talk about Ohio State sports. We don't have to talk about commencement speakers who are, potentially tripping on psychedelic teas and beverages. We don't have to get into that. Although I really hope he gives us a reason to again, because that was a lot of fun over the past week.
We bullied him into saying if I knew I was going to get this much backlash, I wouldn't have ever accepted the invitation to do the speech.
Anyone who gets any kind of heat for anything says that. Why would you wouldn't do something stupid if you knew in advance it was going to be stupid? No one drives down the other side of the road like, well, if I knew it was going to cause a 15-car pileup, I wouldn't have driven on the left side of the road. Well, no kidding, idiot. That's literally the point.
It's also funny because the Lantern called him out a week before he gave the speech.
Exactly.
And he called them fake news. And then once
right.
other outlets picked up the story, and now he's like, oh, I didn't realize I was going to get this much heat. It's like, really? The students were already pushing back on you when you were putting your drafts out.
Yeah, you had 8 drafts online, dude. And people are telling you this is pretty stupid. Anyway.
No, I just got to take out the Gaza stuff, and then everyone will love me.
That's right. I'll keep in everything else that's also unhinged and ridiculous. But if I remove that one thing, it'll all be copacetic. Anyway, deep breath. That's in the past for now. Let's talk a little bit about Ohio State sports. There were, look, the NFL draft is over. There's no practice going on. But one thing that I've realized in the past 5 or 10 years is that there is no off season anymore, truly, for football, especially for college football, but for any sport, I guess. And there's still
sounds like a coping mechanism.
Well, what is professional sports
podcast?
What is fandom but a coping mechanism, right? Fandom for anything, really.
Excellent point.
It's just really kind of a long-term coping mechanism for whatever you might need it for. We've got Gene Smith quotes about, the Michigan game and Asterisks, and we've got
which that's not a coping mechanism either.
Yeah, that's right. We'll get to that. Revenue sharing, TreVeyon Henderson getting praise from Ryan Day. People are still giving interviews talking about all this stuff. I mean, it's good. It's good stuff. So let's go ahead, and I want to start with something a little bit more benign, but we were talking about this before we started recording. I think, I do think that this has a larger discussion that we can get to it. The initial lead into all of this is that Ryan Day heaped praise on TreVeyon Henderson, saying that, there's tremendous leadership, and he's, quote, I've got a feeling he's going to have an unbelievable season. And this is, kind of just, yeah, I mean, this is kind of boilerplate type stuff. Day said, quote, when it first happened and Quinshon went to the portal, the first thing was talking to TreVeyon, and quote, "What are your thoughts?" And he was unbelievable. He said, "If you think it helps the team coach, then let's do it." And then Quinshon said, "TreVeyon's here and he's coming back." And Quinshon said, "I'd love to play with him." And here's the thing. There's been a lot of chatter about the impact that Quinshon Judkins has had in the running back room, that he's just like a dog and he goes in, he's about his business. Everybody loves him. That's the stuff that I've been hearing, that he's a very like serious kind of guy, and guys really like having him around. I think that Day heaping praise on TreVeyon Henderson is kind of maybe even a reflection of that, and saying, hey, we've got two guys who can do that kind of thing for us. But ultimately, and I agree with you, man, like it's been a while since Ohio State it tried the dual running back situation, and it's been a while since it's worked, right? So when they've really gone whole hog.
Clarify, we were talking about this pre-show, and
yeah,
I made the point, like, when was the last time we saw a platooning of Ohio State running backs that actually worked out?
Yeah, and I would think basically Beanie and Pittman back in like 06. Which is
the answer I offered up to you, and you agreed. And it's like, oh, cool, yeah. That was 18 years ago.
Right. Yeah, and so
still had
I guess my point is
on the sideline back then.
Right. And so my
SEC
point is
speed was still a myth for a couple more months.
Oh, for God's sake. Oh, jeez. Glory days. But I feel like I'm with you on this, that they're going to pick a dude. And I don't know, as much as I want TreVeyon Henderson to go out and just wow everybody, I don't know that they're going to be able to have like, all right, each of these guys is going to get 12 carries per game, and they're both going to get 150 yards and it'll be awesome every game. I don't think that's going to happen. I think they're going to have to, like a quarterback position, kind of pick a guy to lean on more than the other dude. And it'll be interesting to see what that dynamic is once they actually start playing games.
Yeah, and we were clamoring all, leading up to the season and then after the commitment to McCord for more running back involvement than TreVeyon Henderson last year, even in, not just for the sake of spelling Henderson and avoiding him having to, shoulder a massive workload, but giving McCord check down options and just kind of diversifying the threats out of the backfield a little bit. We didn't get as much as we wanted to see out of that from Xavier Johnson, whether it was for usage or whatever other reasons, despite his experience and his versatility. Mm-hmm. You were very, very high on Evan Pryor in the early stages of last season before it kind of became apparent that he just wasn't going to be the same guy pre-injury.
Right.
That, we had hoped we were going to see some production salvaged out of. And Dallin Hayden, tragically, for how clutch and serviceable he had been in the prior campaign in spelling injuries, did not really get rewarded for that contribution in any capacity during 2023. Mm-hmm. And could have looked at it ahead to the next season as an opportunity before Judkins made the decision to transfer in, and now has since branded himself as Louis Luggage and gone on to Deion Sanders' reign of terror at Colorado.
Now, where he'll be, I mean, well, and in Colorado, he's going to be like the number one dude, right? And I think that's telling. I think that says where a lot of these guys want to be at. You know what I mean? And
he'll be the number one dude until Deion brands him trash, and
that's right.
Someone else.
That's right. And then finds another son
that tries to run him off the team, as he seems accustomed to doing.
Right. But I think all of these guys think they're going to be the number one guy. And you've got, pictures coming out a few days ago of Quinshon Judkins doing curls out there with Derrick Henry in the gym and looking comparable to a Derrick Henry. By the way, Derrick Henry, he's not going to listen to this podcast, so I can say it. Weak calf. Weak calves. Weak calves.
Derrick Henry, this is a Johnny opinion. I'm not going to,
them calves.
One of my favorite Madden players ever. I'm not going to speak ill of that guy or his calves.
Those calves are weak.
If you want to have a calf off with Johnny, I'm sure he would welcome.
Oh no, he'd still win. My calves are terrible. I have the most poverty calves in the world. It's like I'm not even going to try to pretend that. I mean, look, I would disintegrate in his presence.
Those who stand on glass calves shouldn't throw stones.
I do. I can somehow, and I do. But my point is that I think Judkins came into Ohio State despite all of the the kumbaya stuff where it's like, yeah, let's get it done together, boys. I think both of these guys, Henderson and Judkins, believe that they're going to be the number one dude, and one of them's going to be. I don't think it's going to be some even split of carries. You're going to see someone dominating that role, and that's fine. I think that's what you expect. I do think it's interesting what expectations are for TreVeyon Henderson at this point. He's had I think in a lot of ways, a really interesting career. And that's, I mean, my mom, when she was teaching, forced her students to say interesting instead of like crappy or bad. I don't think TreVeyon Henderson has had a crappy or bad career. I do think he has a very up and down career. Last year, though, he averaged 5.9 yards per carry. He didn't get to 1,000 yards. Fell off in the Michigan game, was not great against Missouri in the bowl. But prior to that had been excellent all season. And, granted, against bad defenses. So it'll be interesting to see how this all shakes out in 2024. But I don't think it's going to be quite as, like I said, the word I used earlier was copacetic. I don't think it's going to be so copacetic come September. I think there's going to be a clear hierarchy.
I've done a lot of, writing of the recent, and by recent, I mean nearly 2 decades of platooning that has gone on with the running backs at this program of late. But if there are reasons for optimism, I should, in fairness, point out these 2 things as well. Number one, who was the last transfer portal running back Ohio State went after?
Oh, well, a guy who set the single game rushing record, right?
Oh, yeah. Trey Sermon kind of worked out for that team, didn't he? Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
It was okay.
So maybe there is some precedent that when Ohio State goes to this well for running backs, that it kind of works out, especially in the Ryan Day tenure. So Judkins does have that kind of momentum going for him. The other thing I'll say, too, is Henderson, it didn't really come up last season, but the guy had injury concerns from the previous campaign, which is where Dallin Hayden got the opportunity that has since carried him on to Colorado, because it certainly wasn't based on the production that he had last season.
Right. No, that's an excellent point.
Now, Henderson and that kind of attrition was, I think, part of the reason that Henderson had his draft stock devalued from what he actually wanted it to be. That was part of what prompted him to come back, to prove that he can play the full slate. Now, only time will tell if he's able to do that going into this season. But another thing that we saw last season was, for the games where Ohio State, it at least seemed like they were going to be 3-score favorites, whether it was 3 touchdowns or 2 touchdowns and a field goal, what have you. They were not afraid to give their prominent skill guys a break. We saw that with Igbuka multiple times. We saw that with Henderson even in the second half of the season, I believe, on at least a couple different instances.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So,
and he was battling injuries even during last season. Like, I know that he had a lot more run, but he had to sit out a couple games where it was like, okay, this dude, needs to rest. He's got to recover. And he came back looking great, right? But he still needed to take some time off.
Right. And if you're a school that holds itself, like, you pride yourself on putting as many players into the NFL as you can, you hold yourself to an NFL standard on both sides of the ball. The NFL standard for successful running back rooms on your roster is a pair and a spare. And that's not just like a 1A guy and then a drop off and 2, like, oh, maybe these guys will work out options. That's 2 guys that that if one of them isn't available, you can just plug the other one in and you're going to get a comparable level of production that at least isn't a drop off from a significant drop off from what you would have from your primary option. That is presumably what Judkins is going to provide with Henderson at the lead that I don't necessarily think you could have pointed to last season when Henderson wasn't available. It was very, very fortunate that when in the season prior when he got hurt, and they didn't even necessarily have Muscle Hamster available because he was dealing with his own injury issues, that Hayden was able to slide into that role. You had the pair and the spare option. In this case, now you've got Judkins in that 1B slot where he may not be getting 1B touches when Henderson is healthy, but for the sake of at least taking tread off the tires to make sure that you've got Henderson available going into the later stages of the season, it's nice to have that security blanket there. So I'm not lamenting the presence of Judkins on the roster. I'm very grateful for it. I'm just skeptical of them being able to get the most out of these guys at the same time.
Right.
And I think expectations should be tempered for that because the hype around Judkins has been pretty enormous going into this season.
Yeah, and you know,
I think what he's already demonstrated.
Right, exactly. And I think it actually is probably useful to look back and look at those games that Henderson missed last year and kind of, you know, see how Ohio State allocated the carries because, you know, he got hurt against Notre Dame. He was out, I think, for the next 3 games. So against Maryland the following week, what they did is they gave Chip Tranum got the majority of the carries. Actually had 20 carries in that game, but only got 61 yards, so did not produce very well. Chop only had 6 carries, but also didn't do super hot. Only 23 yards on those 6 carries. So the running game was not functioning super well. It's lucky that, you know, Maryland was not great and the defense, you know, clearly was up to the task. I think that was one that people were worried about a little bit because Maryland at that point, I think, was undefeated and they had a hot quarterback and you were really hoping that
I wasn't
secondary
worried about that game.
Well, I might have been.
Ohio State
I thought it was kind of a trap game. I thought it was kind of a letdown.
20-point favorites, and they like won by 20. So it was. I think they. I don't know if you call that a cover, but it was pretty close.
Yeah. The next week against Purdue, Dallin Hayden got the majority of the carries there. He performed pretty well, almost 7 yards per carry. But I think he also got dinged up in that game. And then against Penn State, where you're like, okay, they definitely need the running game. It didn't. I mean, Chop was the guy. Brian Williams was the guy who ended up getting the lion's share of the yards, no pun intended, and or carries. And he had 24 carries, but only had like 2.5 yards per carry. So they definitely struggled in the absence of TreVeyon Henderson in the running game. Like there was one game where they were like, okay, this is a solid running game, but for 2 of those games, they really didn't have a solution. Then he comes back the next week against Wisconsin and, you know, he runs for 160 yards and it's like, okay, well, this guy's clearly feeling better. But my point is, my overall kind of point that I'm making here is that I do think that they're going to have to pick a guy, but I also think that it works in Judkins' favor, maybe TreVeyon Henderson's history a little bit, and you know, just what they are trying to expect out of their running back. So we'll see who ends up being the top dog, but I'm happy with where Ohio State is at, even if it doesn't end up being this platoon situation that I think everybody's going to hype up.
Well, and I think that pattern, you know, particularly against the higher profile teams that you just pointed out, highlights another issue that is kind of getting swept under the rug with all the hype around these skill players, which is who's going to block for them.
Yeah, right.
Like there's less talent available going into this campaign than there was last year. And I mean, if we're putting the level of postseason expectations again on this team that we have in recent seasons, I mean, the barrier to entry has been beating Michigan, who has pretty soundly beaten Ohio State at the line of scrimmage 3 games in a row now.
Mm-hmm.
So are we confident that this group has the personnel and coaching staff along the line, at least the offensive line, to get the most out of this running back group, regardless of who they end up putting their confidence and carries behind?
Yeah,
I'm
that's
not
a really
totally
good question.
convinced that they're at that point yet. And I know we're in May, but this has been a problem now for the last 3 years.
Yeah. And there's not like, I mean, at this point, you're really not going to be adding some, hot shot transfer or anything like that. Like what you have is what you have. And that's a really good question. And I don't think we're going to have an answer to it until September, honestly, because that's such a difficult position group to project. And, you can send guys to practice and whatnot, but it's really, really hard to figure out how your offensive line's going to hold up over the course of the season. If they get a couple injuries, then they're in danger mode. You know what I mean? Like they're really in trouble. So we really got to keep an eye on that. And I think that's going to be an interesting narrative in fall camp, because I 100% agree with that. A few other things we kind of want to talk about a little bit. Speaking of transfers, and he's not an official scholarship athlete. He's a preferred walk-on. Got the PWO, and I know that's going to be one of those things that go away. We'll be talking about in a second. But Anthony Venneri, coming out of Buffalo, I guess, averaging about 43 yards per punt. I'll take that. I mean, look, he's a big boy. He's 6 feet, 225. We've got the kicker coming in who's like 8 feet tall and 300 pounds. I like that we got a beefy kicking crew. This guy put in some work at Buffalo. I'm excited to see that. Punting's punting, and I think if you're good at it, you can be good at it pretty much anywhere. So that's cool. I like seeing his I like seeing his highlights, and as a wise man once said, the punt is the most important play in football. So I'm excited to see how that progresses. So that's cool. Go ahead and check out his highlights.
Talk about potential roster shortening by the NCAA later on, and I think if you're one of those sweater vest enthusiasts, you should cherish one of the probably final moments that Ohio State has 3 punters on its roster. So
that's right.
Get your fill.
Jim Tressel is just like on the edge of his seat, just like, oh my God, please, just keep them, just keep all of them.
My heart is already set on the Australian we welcomed earlier this year.
Oh, I know.
There's too many pun potentials for that.
I'm excited for it. A couple more things just before we get to Ask Us Anything. Fox did say officially that the game, Ohio State, Michigan, will be at noon, as it should be. I mean, it's their big noon thing. I don't even think that was in doubt, honestly, but they've now made it official. So there you go. Everybody can sleep tight, that they don't have to, stay up an extra 20 minutes after the game or something like that. I don't know. But that's been super profitable for Fox, and I don't expect them to change it anytime soon. Another thing that I think is interesting, this is not quite related to scheduling, but I do think it is kind of related to Michigan and the game. Gene Smith also said that all of Michigan's wins over Ohio State in the past several years should have an asterisk because of the Connor Stallion scandal and whatnot. And it's like, of course he says that. I mean, would you put an asterisk, George? Would you say that they were fraudulent, that they were ill-gotten?
Oh, of course, but
wins?
I'm incredibly biased.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, we're all biased.
Yeah.
But would you
absolutely?
So
hopefully, and again, this is something we've talked about, ad nauseum, but whenever this investigation comes to fruition, ideally there's at least some kind of punishment handed down. And I would say regardless, unless they get off scot-free, if there's any acknowledgement of wrongdoing at all from the NCAA in the form of a punishment, then there should be asterisks. Because
do you think there will be?
I mean, in terms of the NCAA officially putting asterisks on there, no.
Yeah.
Will there be a punishment? I think there will be in some form based on the fact that they levied punishment for Burgergate, which was
what was that punishment,
less
George?
Egregious.
What was that punishment?
It was probation.
Okay. So they have like an ankle monitor on and they can't leave Ann Arbor, is that?
Yeah.
I have zero faith in the NCAA is going to. No, I understand. That's right. When they try to apply for a loan or something like that, it'll come up in their background check. No, my general point is that I don't think that the NCAA is going to do much of anything to Michigan. And should they? Yeah, probably. I mean, Michigan was basically paying a guy to break the rules for several years. That's kind of how I think it went down. But I think the court of public opinion was the Michigan game this season. If Ohio State wins that game, then I think the entire narrative changes. And I think
I totally agree. And
so that was the forum.
It was a very important game to not lose, and they lost.
That's right. And if Ohio State wins that game,
McCord for that.
That's right. I place the blame entirely on Kyle McCord.
I do. He was the one that gave the pregame speech about not making mistakes, and then
he threw the
ball.
interceptions.
Like it was, you had them playing from behind the whole point of that game.
Right.
Completely clipped the momentum.
I don't blame him for the last interception. I blame him for the first interception. That was pretty
100%.
terrible. Anyway, so I don't know that the NCAA is going to do much. I do think that in terms of asterisks and people talking about how it was fraudulent. Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably a pretty fair assessment of how that went down. I mean, it's they were cheating to try to win, and whether or not that had an impact is really kind of irrelevant. Like nobody really can know for certain how much of an impact Connor Stalions' subterfuge made on the games that Michigan played. But that's because they've refused to talk about it or do any kind of internal investigation or even admit that he was on the sidelines of the Eastern Michigan game, right? Like neither side. That's one of the funniest things to me. Like this guy is clearly incognito on the sidelines of an opposing team's sideline, right? Like he's there trying to collect information. We have video of him doing it, and neither Michigan or EMU will admit that that's
CMU, by the way,
or CMU. Was it CMU? Okay, I'm sorry, yes. CMU, Central Michigan. I'm getting my direction.
Your in-state little brothers.
Yes, I apologize. The Chippewas. So
more respect for Maction.
That's right. That's all the same. Well, I shouldn't say that.
That's why Stalions thought he could get away with it.
That's right.
Nobody even knows these schools. I'll just show up on the sideline. I already look like a total NPC in that would be great.
They're one of the mega teams from
if
NCAA.
EA Sports College Football 25.
Oh my God!
Sideline NPCs.
Oh my God!
Look like the Stalions.
I've been on record that I think that game is going to be trash. But if they come out and they put Connor Stalions on the sidelines of a CMU game, I'm going to buy 3 copies. I will do it just, oh my God. Holy crap. I will cry. That will be the funniest thing that they could possibly do. They're not going to do it because it's EA.
But it's so easy. You just put a beard and sunglasses on a guy. It looks like
my God. I would cry laughing.
That's
that would be so good. That's how
we might get away with it to begin with, because it's plausible deniability. He looks like 100 different people in Michigan.
Yeah, and that's the thing. They never said who it was. Oh, my God. For the love of God, they have to do that. Boy.
That's a layup.
Oh, my God. I really hope they do that. That would be so sweet.
Anyway, we've complained about, this story.
No, we haven't.
If I may backtrack a little bit, I wanna open up something that I think, based on comments on it, maybe a little more into the debate.
Sure.
I was kind of surprised because in my recollection of my fond memories of the game growing up, because Ohio State was beating Michigan practically every year, and I was spoiled with those runs of success.
Right.
I just seem to remember the games not always taking place at noon, at least, kind of extending in the later stages of.
Yeah, no, some of them, I think a couple of them started at like 1:30. I think the 2006 game started maybe even at like 3:30.
Well, that was the last one that took place not in the noon time slot was the game of the century in 2006. And I have go figure, Ohio State won, but I have very fond memories of that whole day. Not only because there was more time to, wait. I mean, even as an adult, like I can't sleep the night before the game.
No,
it's like Christmas morning.
Right.
Especially when both teams, it's one thing when they're going to dominate, but when it's like a big game with a lot on the line, I can't sleep thinking about it. I get so
the nervous
excited.
energy is ridiculous.
It's the same nervous energy you get anticipating Santa when you're a kid.
That's right.
It literally is Christmas morning for Ohio State fans. So you have more of like, I remember we had this like big celebrate, like we were going to this big celebration, and granted it was like mostly Michigan fans because I grew up in Chicago, but we had a big gathering and there was more time to just appreciate the run up of the game and enjoy the day of the game rather than the nervous energy that comes after kickoff, and then either the come down after you lose because you've got the entire like late afternoon into the evening after the game is over, or you've got more time to celebrate after you win. But it's, as everybody, a lot of people will say, it's usually about the journey, not the destination. So you want to appreciate more of the time in the run up. And but further than that, I just remember the aesthetics in terms of the environment of that game, the late afternoon November sky fading into as the sun is coming down, and then you get the last stage of that game. The entire fourth quarter is under the lights, as opposed to having a nighttime environment. You get the best of both worlds.
It was pretty wild.
And I wish that more of these games had that. So what I'm wondering to you is, like, and I'm not getting this based on the way that you introduced the story. Do you wish that more of these games kicked off at 3:30 as opposed to noon? Because I really miss that. And I kind of wish that they didn't traditionally kick off at noon.
I would like to see it happen every once in a while. I think it'd be cool if it were like a one-off thing that they do every so often. I think that would be kind of neat, especially for like a really huge game, maybe to decide, who goes to the Big Ten championship or something like that. That would be cool.
Season.
Yeah. I think that, last season I think would have been a really good opportunity for that. I think if you do it too often, it takes away from the novelty of it a little bit. I really do enjoy the noon kickoff for it. I think, because I grew up with that. Right. I grew up with it always being at noon when I was a kid. So that to me is special, where it's like, it's the first thing. You don't have to wait. You get right into it. And, live or die on the outcome or whatever. But, I went to that game. I was at the 2006 game. I was a senior in college, and, I lived on campus, so I just went with my roommate. We moseyed on. We made a whole day of it. That really, the whole week leading up to it was bonkers because it was a 1v2 game, and there was so much significance. And then Bo Schembechler died, and that was, that
took it into another stratosphere.
Yeah. It was a whole crazy thing.
It was already going to be the biggest thing, and then that was just like, how does this get even crazier? And then I just that totally brought it into a different platform. It's going to be very hard to replicate the anticipation for that game ever again, just based on the fact that happened.
I almost feel like that era of college football is over, more or less. Like there was a certain attitude, there's a certain feeling around college football that I think has changed a little bit. I don't know if it's necessarily for the worse, but the idea that like there's nothing after this. You know what I mean? Like 2006, it was still basically the BCS. You know what I mean? So it's like there was no Big Ten championship. So it was this, okay, you win this. It's the same feeling that you had when Ohio State played Michigan in 2002 and then, went on to play Miami in the national championship. It was like, okay, you win this, you in all likelihood win a national championship, because that's how people felt. Like Ohio State was the best team with the exception of maybe Michigan, and you were going to find that out. So that finality that the game had, which it doesn't have anymore, I think it just had a whole different kind of feeling.
Well, to be fair, that's kind of been the narrative the last two seasons, is that Ohio
State won but you still have to
championship. But
now
Michigan.
you still have to play at least 3 games to win a national championship after you beat Michigan, right? And now it's going to be even more.
But they were going to do that.
Yeah. But my point is
better
that
than all those teams.
Right. But in 2006, TCU. My point is that it was like, you win this, that's it. And you don't have that anymore.
No, I totally
so that's why I kind of appreciated that it was
the stakes have changed.
Yeah, the stakes have changed, and that's kind of why I appreciate that it was a later game, because it really did have this like apocalyptic, like this is the end of the world kind of thing. Now, granted, in that game, first of all, Ohio State I don't think they ever trailed. And if they did, it was like maybe at the very beginning, but they were either tied or ahead.
They gave up the first touchdown.
Yeah. And then right. Okay. You're right. And then they came back.
I remember Mike Hart did the point for Schembechler.
Right. That's right. And then they came back, and Michigan was trying to play catch up the entire game. They just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
But I had zero like doubt that Ohio State was going to win that entire game. I was super, super confident going into it. And so I just enjoyed the hell out of it. It was a freaking awesome game. I had good seats. I was a senior. I was an A deck, like in the corner kind of, but that was still pretty sweet. I got to see, Antonio Pittman's last touchdown, like really close. And it was just, it was sweet. It was just,
you got
it was
to see the last great Ohio State running back platoon.
That's right. I did. That's right. Which, by the way, unbelievable play. One of my favorite plays in Ohio State history was the fake that they ran, where it was like they did this thing. They had done this thing against Michigan a couple years before, where they faked a run up the gut and then bombed it. I think it was like to Gonzalez or somebody, and they just bombed it, and it was like a 50-yard bomb. And then they did the exact opposite in this game, where they faked a bomb and then ran Beanie up the gut, and Beanie had like a 52-yard touchdown run, and it was sick. It was just, he was through the defensive line, and then that was it. Like the defense for Michigan had no idea what they were looking at, and it was awesome.
And then they did a play action bomb later in the game too.
That's right, they did. And it worked out, because that was a freaking awesome team that should have stayed away from the In-N-Out burger and the 35-day layoff that they had.
And not jumped on Ted Ginn in the end zone.
That's right. Yeah, good job. All right, so that's a little bit about that. We're going to talk about a few other things before we get out of here. But before we do that, we remind you that the Dubcast is sponsored by the dry goods store at 11warriors.com. Shirts, hats, stickers, check them out. They're great. We're going to get some new stuff. New stuff is on the way, guys, so keep an eye on that. We're going to get some interesting things in the store. We're going to shake it up a little bit, especially out here in the off season, maybe for the summertime. Keep an eye on that space. We'll give you some more details here soon. Let's do Ask Us Anything. You can ask us literally anything. Send us your thoughts, opinions, questions, whatever, to Dubcast. Within reason. Well, anything. And then I'll just ignore them if they're not within reason. To Dubcast at 11warriors.com. This one's from Dominic. He just has a kind of a comment on the speaker that we were talking about last week. So he said dubs, which I like that. I like the collective we for dubs.
We are dubs.
Yeah, we're the dubs. We're just dubs. Okay. I like it.
Greetings, dubs.
Yeah. I worked at the commencement and witnessed kids in the business school crying as they processed in. One girl would not let her dad take her picture because of her demeanor and tears. She said, wow. Daddy, please check your text. He did and showed me, Dad, I just saw someone jump from the stadium and die. She will never be the same ever. Okay. So that's traumatic, right? Like that's awful. So the business school kids were all separated during the ceremony because they had to redirect them from the area of the incident. We, along with an outstanding effort from the student life reps, were able to put them together again just in time for their walk. Was chaos following chaos. So this guy, Dominic, writes in, this is kind of what we were talking about last week. You have this tragedy that happens. You have this horrible thing that happens. You have people trying to mitigate the trauma that people are dealing with, this obviously scariness of the situation, all the stuff that they have to deal with. And then, as Dominic says, and then we had this moron, Chris Pan, speaking gibberish and selling counseling. As an OSU alumnus and an employee of the athletic department and longtime lover of OSU, he embarrassed me. Was an awful situation cheapened by a moron. I think that is the best way someone could put it. It was a terrible situation
cheapened by a moron.
Yeah.
Very well put.
It was, that's extremely well put. And that's the thing, man. Like we've been joking about it and talking about, there was obviously a very serious situation at commencement. And it was terrible for the people who were involved. Obviously it's terrible for everybody who had to witness it. And that's the thing, man. Like, when something really, really serious happens, and then you contrast that with something really, really stupid and ridiculous, I think it points out like why people should be making smart, serious decisions in these types of situations, no matter what that decision is. Like, this is not something where people should be like, yeah, whatever, let's put on the crypto guy. Like, I think that's, I just think that's irresponsible. And in light of what happened at Commencement, I just think it just throws into light how bad of a decision it was to let that dude speak.
Do you think anybody told him what happened before he made that speech?
No, I don't think so. I would seriously doubt it. I would honestly, as much as we've been ragging on him, I cannot imagine him trying to give that kind of speech with that knowledge. Like, I still think, as dumb as that speech was, and as much as I think that guy's, probably a grifter, selling $30 washer bracelets, I don't think he lacks compassion. I don't think he's a bad person or anything like that. I don't think he would be that tone deaf. I do think it was, like I said, extremely tone deaf of Ohio State to bring, to ask him to be a speaker. But that, again, this, I think, just underlines how you're supposed to be making serious decisions as a serious institution, and he was not a serious decision. So anyway, not a big fan of that. So anyway, I appreciate, honestly, Dominic, I really appreciate the perspective and, that information. I mean, it's like I said, it's terrible, and you got to have people who are taking this stuff seriously. All right. So we'll shift to something a little less heavy. This is from our good friend Alvin, who wants to know very simply, this is completely 180 shift here. What was your favorite activity in recess as a kid? I have fond memories of tetherball and Foursquare.
Oh,
what was your recess? What was your playground like?
This isn't a good question for me, because
I've got a couple of funny stories.
My friends and I were deviants. We started playground wars. I'll tell you this very, very funny story about how we got wars effectively banned on my playground in first or second grade.
Okay.
I think it was first grade. So we had two different playgrounds. There was an older one, and then there was a newer one. And when the newer one got done, there was a lot more just general attention from teachers on the newer playground, because it was bigger. There were more, sets of equipment and whatever, and it was much taller. So there were less ways the kids could presumably hurt themselves at the other set, and it required more eyeballs. My friend and I, we were both, pretty good at getting kids riled up and respected on the playground at that age for different reasons. We decided that it would be funny.
Biggest pog collection. You had it going. That's good.
Right. Well, my ability to rally the degenerate masses is, why I've ascended to my position of podcast host today. Anyway.
Had your Beyblades or Yu-Gi-Oh cards?
Oh no, I wasn't allowed to have those. I got into Pokemon a little bit late, but I couldn't. I didn't have the video games or anything. But I worked my way into the card collecting. But that wasn't so much what it was, as much as it was just we were we knew what kids wanted to have fun playing, and we were pretty active and wild. And I was one of the bigger kids on the playground too, so it was easier for me to roughhouse with pretty much everybody.
Sure.
And my friend was allegedly he had his black belt in kindergarten, so he was this master of war or whatever.
My uncle is a karate master. He has bestowed me.
Right,
bestowed upon me.
Well, so we both had a rep, but we were friends, and what we ended up doing was we ended up creating this war game on this not this less supervised area of the playground. And basically the rules that we set for it were that there would be the attackers and the defenders, and the defenders would have sticks and would sit inside the playground and basically just try to like keep the attackers from invading.
Okay.
And if you got
just jab at them.
Right. And if you got touched by an attacker in any way, you were out and you lost. But if you were a defender and you you successfully like jabbed at one of the attackers or stopped an invader before they tagged you, then they had to go back to like basically they effectively had to go respawn. Like there was a designated area where you'd have to go back and then you'd have to try to make your approach again. Now, the thing that my friend and I realized was that even though we had like set up, like it would start out as teams where there were effectively attackers and then defenders.
Right.
So all day there would be like, you know, kids would be getting ready to like go out and do this at recess, and there would be like tension.
Gotta find the sharpest stick.
We would be like, we can't actually like, you know, you can't like jab at eyes or whatever. Like they're not going to let us do this, obviously. But the thing was, you know, there'd be like legitimate tension between the sides because there were visible leaders between myself and my friend. But the other rule that we made was that like if you were a defender and you got attacked, you not only were you effectively out, but then you basically became an attacker.
Oh, I see.
Because it wouldn't be fun if you just were out of the game, and nobody's going to respect that rule anyway.
Right.
So there would be the illusion of like two sides going to war, but really all we did was just create a cycle of kids, you know, jabbing each other out and then tagging each other out.
Okay.
So it was just.
So it's just an assembly line of kids just jabbing each other with sticks,
which we thought was extremely funny because nobody else had really picked up on that.
Right.
So, but there's still the illusion of war that we're maintaining in terms of one side is winning and one side is losing. And so the way that this finally ends is one day. We're gearing up to do this. And this has been going on for, I don't know how long it's been going on at this point, but it has already become the most popular game among the kids at the playground. And
how could it not be? It sounds awesome.
We've somehow managed to keep it out of the purview of the teachers and the recess supervisors and whatever to this point. Now, don't ask me how I remember all this as a first grader. I've always had just, you know, an impeccable memory. So I'm not making any of this up. But even if I am embellishing some of the details that I've told you up to this point, this part of the story I remember 100%. Okay. And this is how all of this ended.
Yeah.
At this point, it is only the boys that are in the game.
Mm-hmm.
And as I am, you know, a general and pondering my next move in this game that has both the illusions of, you know, two sides.
Marcus Aurelius.
Right.
Sitting down at the frontier of the Roman Empire.
As this continues on with the illusion of, you know, two sides being at each other's, like, you know, end. Yeah. But at the same time, just being this cycle of kids, you know, just kind of going in and out and just poking the shit out of each other with sticks.
Yeah, right.
Eventually, because this has garnered the rep it has, one day I am approached by a group of girls and the leader of that group of girls.
A lot of cooties, yeah.
Right, and this is still the cootie stage, so you know, it's still
already on guard.
However,
you don't want to get cooties.
However, part of the reason that I am viewed with esteem on the playground at this point is because I, you know, had a very good friendship with my neighbor who was like the littlest girl on the playground, and I would very routinely get her involved safely in playground games.
Oh well, that's
nice. So I was at least respected.
Yeah.
That's how I earned my position of respect, not just through sheer bullying because of my size. So the girls feel comfortable enough because of this to approach me, and their leader tells me that they want to be in on this game.
No, God, no.
And I say, I don't know if I'm comfortable with that. I'm like, there's like weapons. This is war.
6, 7-year-old George is like, I don't know. I don't know if I got a spot for you in a ranks.
I'm like, and they're girls. They're gonna cry. They're not gonna take this the same way the guys do, where if they fall over or get hit or whatever, they're just gonna, rub it off and view it as fun. My 7-year-old sexist self.
Yeah, right.
Presumption.
Right.
Right. I mean, I'm making that call based on the experience I have at 6 or 7 years old.
Of course. No, I understand. It's you're all caught up in the, snips and tails and puppy dog's tails.
But here's the thing. There's the illusion of these sides being at each other's throats, even though in the background, my friend and I know it's just funny to watch everyone get worked up into a twister and just start jabbing each other.
Right.
But at the same time, I still want to beat him and he still wants to beat me.
Okay.
And we're kind of declaring winners on this conflict on a daily basis in terms of like day in and day out. So I legitimately want to beat this guy. And this girl, the leader of these girls, told me something so brilliant for how old we were.
Mm-hmm.
I'm telling her, like, I don't know if I feel comfortable with you guys participating in this. I don't really want you to get hurt. And she just looks at me and says, we're girls. They're not going to fight us. And it was like a little light bulb went off in my head, like, oh my God, that is the most brilliant strategy I have ever heard. And so we got all of our attackers in position and they got all ready to defend with the sticks and whatever. Mm-hmm. And I send off my troops as I usually do when the conflict begins. And then out of the shadows, I send in my troop of Amazon
shock troops.
I send in my troop of Amazon warriors. And they're all grinning and happy and like they're ready to go and run in. Right. And I oh my God, the guys were so pissed off.
That's great.
That I violated the sanctity.
Yes, that's right.
By allowing.
Did not the Spartan legions march abreast, man and man,
the whole
arm and arm?
The whole thing comes to a stalemate, and like because the girls are ready to go in.
Yeah,
the guys are like.
Jab some guys with sticks.
No. And then my friend, who's the other general, comes out and just explodes, throws like a full-on temper tantrum.
That's great.
And is telling me about how I violated the sanctity of war by including I won't forget that phrase, the sanctity of war. He said this 7-year-old kid said that. The sanctity of war by allowing these women, these girls into the game. So the whole thing comes to a grinding halt. And of course, because the girls don't get to play, one of them snitches to the teachers about what's going on.
Good.
And then our class gets a talking to about this. And there's 3 recess monitors on the playground for in that area.
The UN had to send in peacekeepers. It was too tense.
And that was the end of it. But that was one of the funniest thing. That was my favorite game for the amount of time it lasted that I played on the playground. And that memory of that girl just looking at me like I was dumber than a sack of potatoes I said, You've
had the atomic bomb.
I don't feel comfortable letting y'all in this, and just telling me, we're girls. They're not going to fight us. I will never forget that.
Like the Mongols sweeping down from the Asian steppe with long bows. That is one of my
favorite stories from my childhood, honestly.
It's pretty good.
It was just so fun. And the best part is, to the best of my memory, or at least whatever I didn't repress, nobody got seriously injured in spite of all our war games.
That's right. A few eyeballs gouged out. Couple broken bones, but otherwise everybody's fine.
But the emotional scars were devastating.
Yeah, I don't have a 10-minute story, but I did really like kickball when I was a kid.
You mean you didn't create kickball factions and send your classmates into battle against each other?
No, we did. I mean, we had very intricate rules for kickball.
You didn't have that kind of charisma, Johnny Ginter?
I definitely did not have that kind of charisma. You know, look, I grew up in Middletown. I went to an elementary school in downtown Middletown. You have an asphalt, you have a half acre of asphalt and you make do with what you got. And I remember very distinctly that there was an abandoned school bus behind a fence next to our playground that I'm like 90% sure. At the time, I was 100% sure that somebody was like living in the bus. And as an adult, I'm only like 90% sure somebody was living in the bus, but there's a pretty good chance somebody was living in the bus. And it creeped the hell out of us.
Into the wild situation on your playground?
I don't know. It was just, we all kind of kept an eye on it the entire time we were back there.
Have you read that book?
Which one? What book?
Into the Wild.
Oh yeah, no.
It had Christopher McCandless living.
Yeah. I actually think you have a better chance of surviving the Alaskan wilderness than you do in an abandoned bus in downtown Middletown, especially during the mid-90s. But yeah, no, kickball was our jam, and I appointed myself like the statistician, like the guy keeping track of all of our home run stuff, which of course I just made up every single day. Like, I'm in charge of scoring, guys, and then just so happens the team I'm on wins every day. And we had specific rules about like what order you had to stand in, when you wanted to kick and how you had to pitch, and it was just very intricate and stupid. But I was a tall kid and I could kick the crap out of a ball and, a relatively small playground. So we had to have rules about like home runs, like in various parts of the what am I trying to say? The playground. If it bounced off the roof of the gym a couple times, that was a double, stuff like that. So nothing super intricate, but, got in a lot of fights. So that's fun. Had a really short temper as a child.
Spirit that lives on every playground when you're in first grade.
Yeah, right.
Maybe it's just a Midwest thing.
Maybe. But yeah, great questions out of you guys for Ask Us Anything. We only have a few more minutes left. I want to mention real quick, and we can maybe talk about this a little bit more. Gene Smith believes that NIL is going to evolve because there's going to be some revenue sharing, possibly, according to old Eugene Smith. So that should be very interesting to see how that all plays out. That combined with potential caps on like 85 scholarships and things like that with rosters, I think it's going to have a dramatic effect on college football more than anything that we've seen so far. I think now it's just kind of been window dressing in a lot of ways. I'm not saying NIL isn't significant, but compared to what's going to happen with like the idea of revenue sharing and limited rosters, I think that's pretty bonkers. And also, Missouri State is going to be your new FBS team. Terrible idea. I have no idea why they would do it. I'd never heard of Missouri State until literally this week. Also, so many schools, probably about 50 to 60% of schools in FBS take a bath on football. I have no idea why a school with no fan base, to my knowledge, no, at least no significant fan base or clout nationally is going to decide to make that leap, but they're going to be joining Conference USA. So whoop-de-doodle. I'm very excited about that when they get to be a November replacement for an SEC team and lose by 70. That'll be fun.
We need relegation in college football.
We do. We actually do. And I was thinking about that earlier today, and obviously it's never going to happen, but man, wouldn't that incentivize teams not to suck? And wouldn't that incentivize programs to actually make money and not just suckle at the teat of subsidization from students and from universities? Wouldn't that help? But of course it will never happen because that's not the model that we have. So anyway, that's interesting. Stupid. But whatever, it's their money or lack thereof. And we'll see how that all plays out. That's the Dubcast for this week, guys. Thank you so much for writing in. I love the perspective, Dominic. Appreciate it. we'll keep following, obviously, that story as it kind of evolves with, the whole speaker thing, if there's more information that comes out. And, obviously more crazy football and Ohio State sports stuff as we go through the summer. So that should be fun, too. So until then, I'm Johnny.
I'm George.
And we'll see you next week.
Take care, folks.